Good afternoon and welcome to the National Tooling and Machining Association and Precision Metal Forming Association Washington, D.C. update, where we update on members and other listeners on public policy and issues, as well as the latest on COVID developments, as we have been doing for a long time. This is the umpteenth webinar that we did, and we lost count, but we're glad to have you. I am Paul Nathanson. I'm with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. Today I am solo. Caitlin Sickles is out. And as always, I am joined by my colleagues Omar Nashashibi and John Guzik from the Franklin Partnership, who are part of the One Voice advocacy team, along with Caitlin and myself at Bracewell. Today we will be reviewing, we'll have federal agency update from CDC and EEOC and Small Business Administration, talk a little bit about what's going on and the focus in Washington on supply chains and workforce issues that you're all experiencing. There's been some developments both on the 301 tariffs and the 232 tariffs that we're going to talk about, and as well as supply chain legislation on Capitol Hill. And with that, I am going to turn it over. Oh, wait, I also have one more slide. This is, sorry about that. It was going so well. Caitlin was going to be proud of me. So I just wanted to point out that NTMA and PMA are sought out by members of Congress, both in the House and Senate, for endorsements of manufacturing-related legislation. This is just an example of a bill that's been introduced in the Senate and the House, the Made in America Manufacturing Communities Act, which is a bipartisan legislation that incentivizes private-public partnerships. It empowers the Commerce Secretary to designate consortiums as manufacturing communities, which would be eligible for federal financial and technical assistance designed to expand and support domestic manufacturing. So this is just an example of the results of the work that your One Voice team, particularly John and Omar, do every day on the Hill. Really, if somebody's going to introduce legislation on manufacturing related issues, John and Omar get a call and asking if NTMA and PMA would sign on to it. So it's just an example of the level of influence that these guys have gained on Capitol Hill on your behalf. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, talk a little bit about COVID issues.
Yeah, so there's a number of federal issues, as Paul had mentioned. I first wanted to bring up the CDC. During the course of the pandemic, I have been critical and have made fun of the CDC for some of their animated documents that they've put out. They've had cartoon characters, they had goofy little posters. But this is one thing that the CDC has done that I really want to give them kudos for. This is the quarantine calculator. And so this is something you should pass along to your HR department. You know, you plug in your zip code. What happens if you come in close contact with somebody with COVID? And so I think it's just a useful tool, you know, as an employer and for your HR departments of how to address the quarantine issue moving forward. As the government starts to open up, there's been all kinds of guidance moving forward. The federal government still is working from home for the most part. Some are beginning to go back to work, going back to their offices. And so recently there was a guidance coming out of how to deal with access for visitors to federal office buildings. And so one of the questions is, can an agency require a visitor to provide documentation of a vaccination? And the answer is, well, if you're in a high or medium infection area, you can't ask for vaccination, but you could ask the visitor to complete a certification form that they are self-certifying that they are vaccinated. And then there's
so keep in mind, please, this isn't about office buildings in the context of our membership and our audience here. If you're a defense contractor, you should be considering what is a federal facility, and those of you that go to Lockheed and some of those, you know, that terminology. So that's what a lot of this is focused on.
Yep. And as things happen in the federal government, often translates into, you know, what your local communities and what businesses may end up doing. And so that is, I mean, there's a line, there's a saying in Washington, once you're on a list, you're always on a list. And so this is just, I mean, other examples, you know, if an agency, can an agency ask for proof of vaccination? And you know, again, if you're in a medium high area, you know, you do not need to provide vaccination, but you should. If you have it, you can't be asked if you're vaccinated, but if you if you fail to provide vaccination status to the people at the federal office building, you could be asked to provide a negative COVID test within 72 hours of entering that building.
Yeah, that federal facility.
Yep. And this next slide is, as I said, this is the beginning of the opening up of this country, but this is a good map of the world and shows how widespread the COVID virus is. And as I said, what starts in some federal buildings may be translated to various communities and communities and office and private sector businesses. And then finally, before I turn it over to Omar, this is another nice little slide, a website of how to get free masks. You type in your zip code and they tell you the local area for the N95 masks moving forward.
Yeah, so that's for the respirators, to be able to get the actual respirators there for the N95s. A couple of quick things for the HR department here, reference for later. The EEOC has done a couple of updates on its FAQs as recently as this month and the last couple of weeks over there. This slide will focus on the caregivers and family responsibilities. The next slide, we're gonna talk about religious objections. No need to go through all of them here as the answers. You'd have to go and click on these links, but you'll see what they talk about: caregiver discrimination related to the pandemic, and what there are issues related to school-aged children due to closures or distancing during the pandemic, and some of those other areas. Do employees have a religious objection receiving COVID vaccination need to tell their employer there's been additional update? If so, there is specific language that must be used. So basically what this is going to help you all do, if you have any company guidebooks, any manuals that you've done with regards to COVID over the course of the last 2 years, talk to your labor lawyers or see if you need to update any of those manuals based on the caregiver and family responsibilities and the allowances and the requirements and the anti-discrimination. You don't want to have an issue that comes in here with regard to specific language, again, on that religious objections, and you have to accept the employee's assertion. We've talked about many of these things over the time, but we just wanted to make sure that you all are aware that there have been updates put out there with regards to religious accommodations in the FAQs that might warrant some manual updating that's out there. A couple other things though, you did want to flag, since a little over 10% of our members did use an emergency, the EIDL loans that were out there. And what that really helped with a lot of our folks that had the emergency injury disaster loan taken, that was part of the Small Business Administration, they now have a loan deferment. Loans now have a deferment of up to 30 months from the date of the notice. Interest is going to continue to accrue on loans during that deferment, and you need to keep that in mind, but borrowers can still go ahead and make payments there. One thing for you EIDL loans, please note that SBA is not going to be sending a monthly form notice. They will send a regular payment reminder only via email. So that's something else for if you have to do that, change that over in your CFO that's out there. Just so this is just something for you folks that are out there. And again, be careful on balloon payments. That's just with anything that's out. One quick question we received is, how can we get a copy of the slides so we can use the links? Absolutely, there will be a slide deck that goes out usually within 2 hours or so of the conclusion of this webinar. So around 2 o'clock Eastern, you should have a copy of this that please feel free to circulate around and answer any questions that you may have. But on construction, Davis-Bacon provision on prevailing wage, we wanted to put this in there because I think John said something that's important there, where the government starts in some area, it could quickly spread. What we really thought that was important, the reason we mentioned this is because it's a return to a different type of definition with regards to prevailing wage, that if we see it used in construction, the definition could be changed and returned to a 3-step method that was used up until 1983, that Democrats obviously supported with regards to the 30% rule. So in the absence of wage rates paid to a majority of workers, what they do is they look at prevailing wage if it's paid to at least 30% of such workers. Now, that's a significant change for some offices and some shops in terms of that, if that were to be out there. So please keep that in mind. And John, as we mentioned, what starts in one place, often in California, does drift to the national level as well.
And so the EPA is looking at rewriting the CAFE standards for cars and light duty trucks. The Trump administration said that California could not monitor its own greenhouse gas emissions for the use for automobiles, and the administration has reversed that policy moving forward, allowing California the authority to monitor greenhouse gas emissions for cars and light trucks. And they're also looking at possibly, so right now you've got the cars and light duty trucks bundled together on CAFE standards, and there is a discussion that the EPA may end up separating, having a certain CAFE fuel efficiency standard for cars and light trucks.
But supply chains, John, I mean, speaking of trucks and disruptions, I mean, we talked about China had their zero COVID policy, and you can see on the slide what that resulted in. And this was taken in early March, and we've now heard in the last few weeks that they are starting to relax their zero COVID policy in certain areas because of the injury and the challenges that it's caused there. But I mean, John, we're seeing it across the board in some areas with regards to some supply chain disruptions continuing.
Yeah, I mean, this slide just shows, Toyota, Volkswagen, Apple. I mean, it's across the board that we're seeing the disruption, and it's having a significant impact. So then we turn the discussion over to what's going on in Russia, and this chart is a very insightful chart. Obviously, the administration and the EU has put together some strong sanctions against Russia. What's going on in the Ukraine, and this chart just shows what impact trade is with Russia. Now, we've heard through the news media that there's not a significant amount of trade between the United States and Russia, and so these sanctions won't have much of an effect on us, and more so in Europe. This chart shows that the United States import and exports roughly little under $40 billion of trade between those two countries. But look at the Netherlands, the second line down. They've got much more exposure. I thought the Germany number was very interesting as well, because many believe that because of the reliance on natural gas and oil from Russia, that I quite honestly thought it was going to be higher. But that is just a good snapshot of how trade with Russia is impacting around the world.
Paul, do you mind jumping in a little bit, because we know you've got a lot of experience before we get into some, we're going to talk about nickel and stainless here in a minute and some other issues, but do you mind jumping in and give us some of your perspective, because you've got actually sources on the ground or nearby?
Well, yeah, I mean, regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I mean, the sanctions are taking a bite out of Russia. It's really, for your ordinary Russian, it's a very tough situation, and it is very difficult to do business with Russia right now if you are a U.S. company. I mean, we have several clients there who, have recently made announcements about pulling out or suspending operations. In addition, for PR purposes alone, Yale University's business school is keeping track of every major company's announcement on Russia. And if you're in the fourth tier, which is that you haven't done anything, or you've said you're staying, Koch Industries is one. There was a couple others. You're getting major pressure both from your customer base to in the media to make an announcement. So it's something to be aware of. The sanctions are taking a bite, but it's going to be a while. But if you have material coming from Russia, you need to be in touch with your supplier, because it will be there is going to be a lot of obstacles to doing business there right now. Thanks, Omar.
Well, I would also add to that, and we've reached out to a few folks. If you ship anything to Russia or Ukraine, or you have in recent years, reach out to PMA or NTMA, or honestly to an attorney. We were on a call yesterday with the State Department or Commerce Department, Bureau of Industry and Security, as part of an export task force we're on. And the issue of machine tools came up. What if there's a manufacturing facility in Ukraine making munitions, and that has an American machine tool in there, potentially getting overrun by Russian forces, and that machine tool being transferred effectively into Russian hands? How does a U.S. company get affected by that situation? So I know there wouldn't be very many out there, but that's something that's certainly on the watch list, as machine tools, tooling, forming, and some of those other processes are very critical in terms of the Department of Defense here in the U.S. And just know that they're watching that closely. But I mean, Paul was just talking about, and John, about Russia. They're more of a commodity area, and anybody that wants an interesting read should take a look at that. The article that's in here, the link is in there, about the 18 minutes of trading that broke the nickel market and what happened in there, because we think it'll give you some additional background not just to the LME, which if anyone's had experience with the London Metal Exchange, John and I've dealt with it on aluminum, it is very different than what you would be accustomed to in terms of contract market. But John, I mean, you see these spikes. Why is nickel so important? Because it goes into stainless steel. Obviously also, John, electric vehicle batteries, right?
Absolutely. And this is, I mean, this was a sharp increase. The London Metal Exchange ended up suspending trading for a couple of days to deal with this tremendous spike hike. I mean, this is basically a battle between behemoths in the nickel industry. Obviously, nickel is mined out of Russia. You've got power brokers in China involved with this. And so it is, because of this little battle behind the largest producers of nickel, has led to this tremendous spike hike.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
But Omar, it's not just nickel, steel, and aluminum. There's also challenges of titanium.
There absolutely is. And when we did some additional background, we were traveling this week with NTMA, and one of our friends from California asked us, you know, what about titanium? What are you hearing there with regards to the Russia market and there being a major supplier, particularly for aircrafts? And that's why we wanted to put out a couple of things and who could potentially fill that void. Half of Airbus, and Airbus themselves have said this, half of Airbus's titanium comes from Russia. Boeing isn't confirmed, but markets report that about a third come from Boeing. Again, I'm not a metallurgist, so obviously there's several different tiers in terms of the titanium we're talking about. You start with a certain type, then you turn it to titanium sponge, then into the metal that's ultimately used, because keep in mind you have a lot of paints and other properties that that certain types of titanium dioxide, that pigment goes into in the United States. But the stuff we care about, titanium sponge metal, really only produced at one major operation here in the United States and not to a sufficient level that's out there. So we're going to need to see Japan jump in there as you see import sources for the United States. That's going to be an issue where there's going to be greater demand on them to supply the rest of the world. And that's going to be obviously a problem, along with, you see Ukraine that's listed on there. One thing that we did want to just kind of look at a whole of supply chain. One of our other association folks sent this to us just to look at the plastics industry. And they're under a lot of pressure, whether it's from environmental recycling, but think about the oil and gas that goes into it. And then, as we mentioned, a number of those chemicals and inputs. As you think about your customer and your customer's customer, and when you're talking about your own price increases, we're seeing a lot of those inputs there that, John, I think is really wreaking havoc on the economy right now, or at least from what some of the markets are thinking.
Yeah, and this chart shows what impact an inverted curve would have on the economy. This has been a precursor for a number of years. 8 out of the last 10 recessions, the precursor to the recession was when long-term bond rates and short-term rates become inverted. And so, this is a sign that the economy is slowing down, and that, you know, that's why many people are talking about potentially going into recession. I know Powell at the Federal Reserve is doing his best. You know, they hiked the interest rates 0.25 of base rate. Many are expecting a half-point jump the next time they meet, but again, they're trying to prevent the country from going into recession.
Yep. And I think that's part of, they're going to have to do an interesting landing on some of this, but we're not here to give you an economics lesson. We're just showing you what the supply chain, some of the results that are out there, because we're also having a major problem with manufacturing job openings, with 507,000 manufacturing jobs open in durable goods. And that's not our highest number, but it is sure darn close to where we were just a few months ago. And that's 500,000 just in the durable goods. When you add in everything else on those items that just don't last more than 3 months or so, you're looking at 855,000 jobs that are open in a lot of competition. This chart here will show you across the different states where we stand. Everything from in Tennessee at 6.7%, Indiana at 7.6% of the job openings that you've got there. Pennsylvania is hovering at around 8%. We really have nowhere in the country where we have significant amount of members under 6% job opening rates. And if we think back to some of the times, just even half a decade ago, we were looking at 3% unemployment, and even below that in the 2 range in the Minneapolis area. So we just want to forecast and give you a heads up that this problem is not going to change. But John, let's just go ahead and get into some of the things going on here on Capitol Hill with the supply chain. And Bernie Sanders giving us a little hiccup, but we're still moving.
Yeah, this has been a bill that has changed names multiple times. Today it's now called the Bipartisan Innovation Act, which used to be the Frontier Act. On the House side, it was American Competes Act. It was called USICA at one time. Essentially, both the House and the Senate in a bipartisan way, or at least in the Senate, in a bipartisan way, have passed legislation to start to address the supply chain issue with China. Both House and Senate bills provide $52 billion for semi-chip conductor development. There in the House bill has some really good, and we're continuing to work to make sure that some of the workforce, the Jobs Act, which provides Pell Grants for short-term training, the American Competes Act is included in that final bill. The Senate this week has done some parliamentary imaginations to get this bill over to a conference committee. This will be the first conference committee I think this Congress has done, in this session. And so the House and Senate bills are somewhat similar, but somewhat far apart. Initially, we were hoping that they could probably get this resolved by Memorial Day with the conference committee, not probably be formulated until sometime in April. I think, Omar, I'm not sure what your thoughts are, but I think it's probably going to be Memorial Day before they get to a resolution of working out the difference between the House and Senate bills.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're probably going to end up for final votes. We're going to be slipping into June. It'll probably happen that second or third, maybe if we're lucky, the first week. But we're going to slip into June based on conversations. John and I spent about 45 minutes this morning with the Energy and Commerce Committee staff, just us. They are looking for our official endorsement of their section on supply chain resilience. And there's a lot of good things in there. For example, they literally mention the word forming. They include that. Yes, staffers know what that is. They mention the words casting. There's a couple of emphasis in areas on machining, machine tools especially, and on tooling. On machine tools, we had a specific discussion on that as it's a focus of the Department of Defense, and we're looking at doing an investigation into the resiliency and the capabilities of the domestic machine tooling industry that obviously we can provide a lot of input on, and we did and are continuing to do so. So those conversations are continuing with regard to some of the language that's in there. But I think John's right. This is going to be a very, very significant bill, and hopefully we will be able to get it over the edge. Know that it is extremely specific to us. This isn't just a manufacturing end product, give me more ventilators, masks, and gloves. They are really, really getting into the weeds of it. They have a definition for industrial equipment, for example, that will include some of our members. It will include dies, it will include molds specifically, it includes tooling. So again, they go through a number, they talk about joining. They're getting more technical than a typical congressional bill does. But John, I think the other side of it is they got a lot of pressure from industry on K Street and retailers to reopen the tariff exclusion process, and they granted 352 exclusions this week.
Yep. Before we jump there, I just want to say the one hiccup that may cause a delay in consideration is House Republicans are trying to insert some domestic energy production provisions in that, and obviously domestic energy production is a lightning rod in the Congress, and so that may further delay final consideration on that bill. But Omar, you're right. The Trump administration, when they established the 301, the Section 301 tariffs on China, which is a 25% tariff or 7.5% tariff. The Trump administration initially granted a little over 2,200 exclusions, those who are exempt from these tariffs. Most of those exclusions expired. Earlier, roughly 549 were extended for an additional year. With this announcement, with granting the 352 exclusions, was 352 of the 549 have been granted. And what it does, it does temporarily make them exempt from the 25% tariff or 7.5% tariff. The relief is retroactive to October 12th of 2021 and lasts through the end of the year. What are the products that fall under this? Air purifiers, aluminum valves, steel push pins, crab meat, bicycles, metal folding chair frames. So those are some of the things that are the exclusions that have been granted under this announcement that was just made this past week.
So a reminder that the exclusion is a temporary relief to those that are importing it from paying that 25 or 7.5% tariff, as John mentioned, and there's been a lot of pressure to go forward. Now, this is not a process that's open. The reason they're retroactive to October 12th is because on October 8th, USTR said they were looking into this for those items that were remaining that they had not made a decision on and that they left over from December. So this is not a full opening of a new process yet. There are a couple things going on with China right now that the administration is looking at. What they are looking at is one, a review of the China trade policy. Currently, we have what's called the Section 301 safeguard. Trump imposed that based on IP theft and intellectual property transfer. That was the narrow focus that he kept it. The administration is looking at a Section 301 case more along the lines of what we would suggest, which would be targeting illegal subsidies from the government of China towards manufacturers and targeting state-owned enterprises. Those were the two big things that we asked for them to push for at the time. So if they were to go do another 301 resulting in tariffs, our understanding is they would push those as more substantive areas to justify tariffs. Now, the administration is going through an internal debate. USTR, the US Trade Representative, wants to exempt a narrower list from tariffs, meaning USTR is calling for more tariffs on more products where they were to review the existing list of 7,000 or so. What they go from there is the Commerce Department and Treasury Department, they want more exclusions, meaning they want fewer products subject to a tariff. Because of that disagreement, they held off in early March of coming out, making the announcement on what they would do. They're still reviewing the Section 301 because by law, they have to review the current one Trump put in place at 4 years, which is by the end of June this year. And so that process is still ongoing. They will likely repeat that and continue some type of tariffs, but just know that this is not fully reopening the process. And those of you that have competing products from China know that the tariffs to protect you are still remaining in place right now. But John, speaking of tariffs, we got our latest update from Customs and Border Protection, and 61 categories on steel and aluminum are already filled.
Yeah, and to one more point on the China 301 is we do not expect any relief from any tariff relief, at least till after this next election. Most likely not till after the next presidential election, because
Yeah, they're looking at they're changing the list. So what they're going to do is we are pretty positive that when they do make the changes to the tariff list, they are going to remove some of the more consumer-oriented items and some other some inputs they're talking about as well. But they are going to change the items that are tariffed and try to relieve some of the inflationary pressures that are ongoing, and then they will also restart an exclusion process, is what we're hearing.
And this next slide just shows a website where you can check to see where steel and aluminum imports are coming from, and if they've met, if they've exceeded the tariff quota level. And so, and what this does show that a number of steel and aluminum items, they've met the limit, and so now those imports will be coming into this country with a 25% steel, 10% aluminum tariff.
Yeah, so keep that in mind. Again, we've been trying to tell you now every week, start developing patterns. By the end of the second quarter here, we should have a good idea of what this regime is going to be doing to you all. And what we would also strongly suggest is when you look at this, maybe go to next week or the week after at the end of the quarter, start gauging when in the period the quota was filled for steel, because in the far right column, there's a timestamp to the exact minute. And then you can see, okay, it was filled in the first 7 days, filled in the first 5 days, or it didn't get filled until March 22nd. And that might help you with some of your planning and purchasing and having your conversations with some of your folks that are out there in the steel buying area in your service centers. But I don't know, Paul, if you want to jump in, since I know Camu's been doing quite a bit, but the US did replace the UK steel and aluminum tariffs with tariff rate quotas, very similar to what they did with the European Union that took effect on January 1st.
Yeah, they had the US and UK had negotiations in Baltimore, and it yielded an agreement. No surprise, it's an agreement that's similar to the tariff rate quota agreement that the US had with the EU. It does include both steel and aluminum tariff rate quotas. As a reminder, allows a certain amount of product to enter the country tariff-free, and then after the quota is filled, then you have to pay the 25% steel tariff, 10% aluminum tariff. There's some strict provisions to that the UK has to meet regarding melted and poured in the UK. Again, we expect that we're going to have the same issues with the certain products filling up very quickly, as Omar just described. So We do not expect any more announcements after this about tariff rate quotas. They continue to, the administration continues to say this is the end of the deals, even though Korea, which has a hard quota for all their steel products that they had negotiated under the Trump administration, would like to have a similar deal like this. But we, at least Omar, I haven't detected any change in the administration's intention. The Coalition of American Metal Manufacturers and Users that we run did put out a statement pointing out that national security tariffs, which were that's what was used, Section 232, to impose these tariffs. I mean, I think with the conflict with Russia over Ukraine really shows that what national security really should mean, and that access to needed materials and raw materials is essential for U.S. manufacturers. And while it's always good news that the U.S. is easing tariffs, there are a lot of problems with tariff rate quotas that we continue to talk to the administration about.
Yeah, and I don't know if you flagged it, but for you aluminum users, make sure that you know that your aluminum cannot contain any primary aluminum from China, Russia, or Belarus.
So this was the statement that we put out to the media a couple of days ago regarding the this deal, and it's available on social media. Tariffs Are Taxes is our Twitter account, and also that's the name of the website as well. And this continues to be of interest to the media. So regarding media update, there continues to be major interest in how the war and sanctions on Russia are impacting manufacturers' ability to get material. So, and obviously there's always interest on steel and aluminum tariffs. We are in support of all the work that John and Omar are doing on Capitol Hill, keep the issue of labor shortage, recruitment issues, how manufacturing has great careers that folks need to know about. We're talking to the media every day about that. We put up the volunteer forms for both NTMA and PMA. So if you're interested in talking to the media about these issues, it's very helpful to our efforts in Washington, D.C. We would never put you on with a reporter without talking to you first, and also helping you discuss how you want to make your points, and giving you background on the reporter. And also, if you don't get enough of us once a month, we do put up a podcast called Talking with One Voice, available at all major podcast platforms. John, Omar, Caitlin, and myself, we will have another episode going up next week, but you could, they're usually about 20 to 30 minutes where we talk about these, and we dive in a little deeper on these issues and some other issues. So please give us a listen.
Yep, and John's support's always welcome.
Absolutely, and those PMA and NTMA members who've contributed to the PMA's advocacy fund, or NTMA's GAF funds, thank you very much. I know PMA has a solicitation out there already. They started getting some money in, and thank you for those who are on this webinar who've already contributed. But if you like the content that we are providing, you want to continue supporting the PMA's advocacy fund, and the GAF goes a long way in making sure that we continue to have the resources to provide that content. So thank you for those who have contributed.
Yep, thank you. We've got 2 questions already in there. Anybody else, please go ahead. And since we're just trying to wrap up by 35 to give you all your day back, please type up any questions you may have on any topics out there. A couple of them. Will any policy actions be taken in 2022 in the US to bring down gas prices at the pump? There's a few things that are happening that are symbolic, some that will be legit. Let's just start with the first, most recent one that came out this week, might have been over the weekend. The Biden administration said it's going to resume plans for oil and gas drilling internally on federal lands. What had there's a couple of holdups out there. One was the calculation on the social cost of carbon that they were working with that got opposition from some industry. There was a Louisiana court that blocked the administration from moving forward with the additional leases last month. That another court on Friday of last week, a federal court of appeals did grant the White House request last Friday to allow the administration to use a different type of metric for calculating the potential cost to society of greenhouse gas emissions. So with that ruling, the Department of Interior is going to move forward. our understanding of this is going to be oil and gas development on American federal public lands and waters. They're going to be issuing leases next month. So April is what we heard on that one. As you can tell, the president has been talking about the 9,000 leases for offshore that are around, that are still currently available, that aren't going. Haven't checked the rig count lately, but Baker Hughes had the rig count hovering at somewhere around 700, upper 680s, which is still about higher where it's going to go. Now, will that actually trickle down? A lot of this is, you all know, oil and gas, that's speculative. They control their own supply, they control their own destiny. And we're hearing on the shale side on fracking, in a couple of years, they're saying you might start seeing an increase in shale, but right now the margins just aren't there, and shale sand that is used as part of that fracking process is extremely expensive from what we're hearing, also almost making the margins not manageable. And so that's sort of a little bit of the layout of what we're hearing in terms of things that may help and may not, at least from what we're hearing.
Omar, to your point, you can't just turn on a spigot and oil will be flowing. It's going to take several months for this to happen. The second thing I want to say is the oil and gas industry is inhabited by speculators, and there are those who would like to keep the price of gasoline and oil up high. So it'll be a while.
Last question. President Biden now says that sanctions are not a deterrent. So why then would he talk about potential sanctions on China? A few things. One, to this person who we know well, more than happy to give you my personal opinion on sanctions and tariffs and their effectiveness. But what he's looking at is a couple of things. He's trying to build up an international, to Paul's point, an international unity going against Russia. And so far, he's been able to do that with the Western world. What a lot of folks were critical of the Trump administration doing was a go-it-alone approach to China when he had an opportunity that his Commerce Secretary negotiated for him in June of 2017 that would have brought the European Union along to go after China, but it didn't go far enough with regards to tariffs, so Trump rejected that. And that's how we ended up going it alone. The Biden administration right now, to the questioner's point, is saying if we can demonstrate this work to isolate Russia, now it hasn't changed their outcome, but it's clearly caused economic pain that's going to take years for them to recover from. We can demonstrate the pain that it's causing Russia. Maybe we can demonstrate the pain as a deterrent to China. Now we can all speculate on that on our own time after hours, but that we believe is the reason, because as you've heard us say this before, Biden is a multilateralist and takes it from unilateral and geopolitical aspects. So that's why he likes those multilateral approaches. If there's any other questions, any other thoughts? No. Thank you everybody for joining us today on this Friday. We will be back again, I believe, on Friday, April 29th with the latest updates from everything coming out from Washington. And we're going to have some news for you on overtime rule that the Department of Labor is actively working on. Thank you and enjoy your weekend.